Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to more lore and loot. Today, we are continuing to explore the timeline of Tamriel, and we're going to talk about the First Era. If you would like to know about the two previous eras, the Merithic and Dawn eras, please check out my video covering those two eras. I will leave a link to that video in the description section below. Please also note that I won't be covering every event in the First Era, as that would take forever. So I'm going to be covering mainly the most important events. Alright, as you'll recall, the Merithic Era officially ends with the founding of the Camoran dynasty by King Eplir. The Camoran dynasty ruled Valenwood for hundreds of years, and we will be coming back to them throughout this series. In the year 113 of the First Era, a very notable figure was born. His name was Harold. Harold was a descendant of Ysgramor. You'll recall that Ysgramor was the Atmoran king who, along with his two sons, led the armies of Atmora against the snow elves of current-day Skyrim. It turns out that Harold was one of the most important figures not only in Skyrim history, but in the history of men of Tamriel as a whole. As a mighty warrior, he was able to unite Skyrim under one banner. Additionally, he was the first person to hold a moot, a tradition that has continued for centuries. In fact, Harold's influence and culture of expansion was so pronounced that it was only a matter of time before Skyrim conquered all of the northern realms. His son, King Vrag, eventually conquered High Rock, Morrowind, and even went down into the Nibelheim Valley. Now, taking place around the same time in Cyrodiil, the Ayleids were facing a revolt. You may recall that the Ayleids were a race of elves that lived in the heartland of Tamriel. Thus, they are also known as the Heartland High Elves. The Ayleids left the Somerset Isles and established themselves in modern-day Cyrodiil sometime in the Merithic era. The Ayleids settled in the area surrounding the White Gold Tower and eventually became an independent nation, as they were separated from the Somerset Isles and were no longer under the influence of the Altmer government. The Ayleids were powerful sorcerers and practitioners of magic. They, like the Chimer, took to Daedra worship. They made deals with these powerful entities and became more and more powerful, using that power to subjugate the races of men that were living in the Nibelheim Valley. After many years, the Ayleid control of the region was complete, and the enslavement of the Needs, the race of men who lived there, was also complete. Now, it was at this time that a young girl, whose real name has been lost to history, but whom we know as Alessia, began her revolt. And this revolt is one of the most important moments in Tamriel's history. Legend has it that Alessia prayed to the Aedra that they would free her and her people from under the boot of slavery by the hands of the Ayleids. It is said that the Aedra answered her prayers and allowed her to rise up against her oppressors. Legend has it that she worked alongside a demigod by the name of Morrowind, a winged man-bull, to raise an army capable of engaging the Ayleid armies. At this time, a mysterious and mythical figure, Pelinal Whitestrake, would arrive and join their cause. Morrowind was a strong warrior, but Pelinal was a force of nature, gathering allies in the form of the Nords of Skyrim, as well as some dissatisfied Ayleid lords. Alessia and her forces eventually made their way to White Gold Tower. Pelinal hated elves. We don't know exactly why, but his hatred for merkind was vicious and unending. It is said that he slew the Ayleid kings one by one, and none could stand in his way. When the armies of Alessia arrived at White Gold Tower, Pelennor fought another figure of legend, Umaril the Unfeathered. Umaril was a half-elf, one parent a mortal mer, the other one of the Et'ada. Umaril challenged Pelennor, who gladly accepted, and went in by himself without the rest of Alessia's army. However, Umaril sent wave after wave of expendable soldiers in against Pelennor until he was weakened and tired. At this moment, Umaril came forth, expecting a quick battle against a worn-out enemy. Nevertheless, he underestimated Pellennor's strength and ferocity, and Pelennor slew Umaril. Despite winning against this foe, the exhausted Pelennor was descended upon by the remaining Ayleid kings, and they killed him, cutting his body into 8 pieces. Morrowind eventually led the rest of the army onto the island where White Gold Tower stands, and conquered it in the name of Alessia. After the fall of the Elven capital in 243 of the First Era, Alessia declared herself Empress. Immediately, she faced a challenge. Her people, the men of Cyrodiil, had taken to worship the Elven pantheon. However, her new Nord allies, who absolutely hated the elves, would not stand for the worship of elven gods. So Alessia invented the 8 divines. This was an elegant, well-researched synthesis of both pantheons, Nordic and Aldmeri. Essentially, she gave the existing elven gods Nordic names and or characteristics, blending the two in a way that retained their original essence, but that appeased the Nords. It is also said that the Aedra, Akatosh, the Dragon of Time, made a covenant with Alessia. He gifted her with the Amulet of Kings, saying, "This shall be my token to you, that so long as your blood and oath hold true, yet so shall my blood and oath be true to you. This token shall be the Amulet of Kings, and the covenant shall be made between us. For I am the King of Spirits, and you are the Queen of Mortals. As you shall stand witness for all mortal flesh, so shall I stand witness for all immortal spirits." When Alessia died in the year 266 of the First Era, legend has it that Akatosh made her a saint and put her spirit into the amulet, and this is where the legend of the dragon fires comes from. This shall also be a token to you of our joined blood and pledged faith. So long as you and your descendants shall wear the Amulet of Kings, then shall this dragon fire burn, an eternal flame, a sign to all men and gods of our faithfulness. So long as the dragon fires burn, to you and to all generations, I swear that my heart's blood shall hold fast the gates of oblivion. Alessia was buried in the fortress of Sancretor, although some accounts say she was buried in the imperial city, but no one knows for sure. Alessia would go on to become such a legendary figure that eventually an entire religion would emerge dedicated to her worship. The Alessian Order was started by Maruk, a character whose exact identity is unknown, although he may have been an Imga. The Imga are a race of ape-like creatures that inhabit Valenwood. The Alessian Order believed in monotheism. Specifically, the Order was against the worship of any of the Aldmeri pantheon, even if given Nordic names and characteristics. Eventually, the Order became the Empire, and they enforced their Alessian doctrines with force and violence, driving out the remaining Ayleid lords who had, at one point, been allies of Alessia herself. At this point, the Alessian Empire was the most powerful nation on Tamriel. However, their northern neighbors, the Nordic Empire was about to face some huge changes. We'll be covering the Nordic War of Succession, as well as the Nordic War with Morrowind, in the next episode of Lore and Loot. Today we covered the beginning of the First Era. We talked about Harold, the Nordic king whose influence and legacy helped expand the Nordic kingdom in the north. We talked about the Ayleids and their subjugation of the men of Cyrodiil. And finally, we talked about Alessia, the slave queen, her rebellion, and her covenant with Akatosh. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Lore and Loot. See you next time.